Nominees and 3 bills on the agenda. 2 of the bills have been listed for the first time. We held over S 3538, the Earn It Act, which we have passed before in this committee. It's sponsored by Senator Lindsey Graham and Dick Blumenthal, myself, and others, Senator Grassley, Feinstein, Cornyn, Whitehouse, Hawley, Hirono, Kennedy, and Blackburn. And S 3103, eliminating limits to justice for child sex abuse victims. I introduced this bill with Senator Blackburn. It's co-sponsored by Senators Feinstein, Cornyn, and Leahy. I look forward to voting on both of these important bills next week. The committee has historically played a vital role in protecting kids from sex abuse and exploitation. With these bills, we'll continue to do so on a bipartisan basis. A number of the nominees have been listed for the first time, will not be voted on today, will be held over at the request of the minority. They include Andre Mathis for the Sixth Circuit, Jessica Clark for the Southern District of New York, Hector Gonzalez for the Eastern District of New York, Fred Slaughter for the Central District of California, and Andrew Foyce to be chair of the Administrative Conference of the U.S. I understand we can voice vote the 2 nominees to the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which we'll do shortly before turning to the bill. I want members, if they would, to pay notice and attention to what I'm about to say. We are holding over 2 U.S. Attorney and 2 U.S. Marshal nominees. Marissa Darden, U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. Delia Smith, U.S. Attorney for the District of Virgin Islands. Eddie Frizzell to be U.S. Marshal for the District of Minnesota, and LaDon Reynolds to be U.S. Marshal for the Northern District of Illinois. These nominees have been held over at the request of Senator Cotton. These holds have nothing to do with the nominees and their qualifications, but they spring from a request which Senator Cotton made to the Justice Department on Monday, related to an ongoing litigation matter. Senator Cotton demanded a response to his letter within 24 hours, or he would delay consideration of these law enforcement officials. Senator Cotton, of course, has that right under the rules of the committee. But let me make 3 brief points. First, the fact that you have the right to do this is not exactly a rationale for doing it when you consider the consequences. I would remind my colleagues that it's a departure from this committee's norms and traditions to hold over U.S. Attorney and U.S. Marshal nominees. Now, we've done it. Democrats have done it. During the 4 years of the Trump administration, Democrats held over 3 U.S. Attorney nominees and 2 U.S. Marshal nominations temporarily. Already this Congress, though, including today's request, Republicans have held over 2 U.S. Marshal nominees and 8 U.S. Attorney nominations. I don't believe that serves the interest of justice. Second, the request to hold over Ms. Darden, Ms. Smith, Chief Frizzell, and Chief Reynolds deprives the people of Ohio, the Virgin Islands, Minnesota, and Illinois of critical Senate-confirmed law enforcement leadership. I'm honored to represent Illinois. I'm especially honored to represent the great city of Chicago. But we are in pain and suffering at this moment in this city and many cities that you represent because of gun violence and crime and death. I could recount to you just what I've read in the last week in the newspapers of Chicago, the reports of the murders and killing and shootings that are going on every single day. Now, I know that 75% or more of law enforcement, we rely on state and local sources. But for God's sake, we have a part in this, an important part in this, making sure that there are U.S. attorneys to prosecute those who are breaking the law, making sure there are U.S. Marshals to administer justice and law enforcement at the most basic and fundamental level. I promise to my state and to the city of Chicago to do everything I can to marshal these federal resources. And I come into the committee that I chair and have someone holding up an individual who wants to be the U.S. Marshal in the Northern District of Illinois. So what's wrong with Chief Reynolds? Well, I can tell you, he's been the police chief of Oak Park, Illinois for 28 years. Nothing is wrong with this man. He's extremely well qualified. It's one thing to give speeches on the floor about how much we respect law enforcement, but then to diss this poor man who wants only to serve his country as U.S. Marshal at this moment in a time of high crime is just indefensible. Chief Reynolds has outstanding qualifications. He needs to be on the job. He would fill a vacancy that was never filled under the previous administration. It's been since 2018, since we've had a U.S. Marshal. If anyone, Republican or Democrat, truly cares about preventing crime as they claim, we should vote on these 4 nominees today. Get them confirmed on the floor as quickly as possible. Make this routine to show that we are, on a bipartisan basis, willing to fight crime. Third, I would note that during the Trump administration, the Justice Department constantly stonewalled Democratic attempts at oversight. Yet Democrats did not respond by needlessly delaying the committee or the Senate's consideration of U.S. attorneys and U.S. Marshals, who together represent the chief federal law enforcement officials in their respective district. Again, I plead with members of this committee, do not, at the expense of innocent people who are being victimized by crime every single day, exercise your political right and deny law enforcement at the federal level to the people that we represent. I plead with you, let us return to the regular order. If you're unhappy with the response from the Department of Justice on anything, please tell me. I'll do my best to try to make sure that it's expedited. But don't hurt innocent people because of your frustration with anything coming from the Department of Justice. We're going to vote today on 2170, the Bipartisan Open App Markets Act. And before speaking on the bill, I want to turn to the ranking member for his remarks.
Yeah. Not commenting on the recent holdup, but by any individual at this hearing, but I can tell you, whether you have a Republican president, a Democrat president, a Republican Senate, or a Democrat Senate, a lot of innocent people have been hurt by these administrations, Republican or Democrat, not responding properly to congressional requests for information. I'd like to say a few words about the Open App Market Act. While I have some concerns about the private right of action in the bill, I'll vote to move this bill forward. I appreciate Senator Blackburn's and Blumenthal's work on this bill. Also, I'm encouraged that the committee has taken a hard look at the dominance and control that big tech has over American consumers and smaller businesses, starting with us successfully reporting out the American Innovation and Choice Online Act 2 weeks ago and taking up this particular bill this very day. So I'd like to discuss joint oversight requests that Justice Department has from me and Senator Johnson. So another act of getting back into when is Republican and Democrat presidents going to completely cooperate with the Congress of the United States. So on January the 19th, 2021, then President Trump issued a memorandum to Attorney General, Director of National Intelligence, and the Director of Central Intelligence Agency. It was directed to them to declassify certain Crossfire hurricane records. The next month, my staff reached out to the Justice Department requesting an update on where that directive stood. My staff and Senator Johnson's staff repeated that request throughout the year. October 13th last year, Senator Johnson and I wrote to the Attorney General requesting an update on the declassification process. In response, on January the 20th this year, the department stated that it had yet to examine and determine exactly what materials are subject to declassification. That's 1 year after the declassification directive was issued. The department has yet to produce a single record to Congress and the American public. Further, the department has yet to confirm that these Crossfire hurricane productions to Congress won't include Freedom of Information Act redactions. As we all know, Congress didn't create FOIA for it to be used to hide information from Congress. Yet the executive branch, Republican and Democrat, uses FOIA as a shield in that way. Accordingly, Chairman Durbin, this presents a perfect bipartisan opportunity to assert this committee's authority over the Justice Department. I encourage you to join my efforts to ensure that this committee is provided production free from FOIA redactions. I'd also like to speak briefly about Supreme Court. On Tuesday, Chairman Durbin and I discussed nomination process with President Biden, and I thank the President for taking the time to meet with us. I also thank him for making it clear that we'll have a process that allows us to diligently and fairly review the nominee's record. Our job is to carefully scrutinize the nominee's qualifications, temperament, and commitment to our Constitution. We'll do that, and we'll treat the nominees with dignity, fairness, and respect. Along that line, whether you're a Republican member of this committee or a Republican member of the caucus outside of this committee, if you want to meet with this this nominee, whoever it is, I hope you'll make that known so that we don't kind of use this process to say that can be accused of deliberately delaying the consideration of the nominee. We don't know who you are, but if you want to, you ought to let us know. What we won't do is rubber stamp someone committed to implementing a radical progressive agenda by legislating from the bench. I've talked about liberal dark money many times. Seems like these groups have already made it clear that's what they expect from whoever the president nominees, and I suppose the president's getting the pressure just exactly to do that. I hope the president rejects these demands and picks someone committed to interpreting the Constitution or laws according to their text and original meaning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. As I noted previously, we can proceed today with voice votes on two nominees to the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which I'll hereafter refer to as the board. Sharon Franklin has been nominated to be chair, and Beth Williams has been nominated to be a member. This board consists of 5 members on a bipartisan basis, 3 from the president's party, 2 from the minority party. These 2 nominees reflect not only that bipartisan structure, but our bipartisan commitment to ensure that we protect the nation's security and remain vigilant to America's civil liberties. Both of these nominees have excellent credentials, a breadth and depth of knowledge that will serve them well on the board and serve the nation. Before proceeding to a vote, does anyone else wish to speak on Ms. Franklin or Ms. Williams' nomination? If not, on favorably reporting the nominations of Sharon Bradford Franklin to be chairman and member of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board and Beth Ann Williams to be member of the same board, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The majority of the members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The nominations will be favorably reported to the floor. We now turn to S. 2170, the Open App Markets Act, sponsored by Senators Blumenthal, Blackburn, and Klobuchar, co-sponsored by myself, Senator Graham, Booker, Kennedy, Hirono, and Hawley. This bipartisan bill places important limits on the gatekeeper function exercised by dominant companies in the App Store market. I'm not going to describe the bill because I believe that Senator Blumenthal is going to do that after he introduces a manager's amendment. Without objection, I'll ask if we can have a voice vote to adopt the manager's amendment to the bill before us. If there's no objection, all those in favor of the manager's amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Manager's amendment is adopted, and I recognize Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your leadership on this very important bill. I want to begin by thanking Senator Blackburn for her tireless and tremendous leadership, and Senator Klobuchar, who has played such an important part in this antitrust consideration and was one of the original co-sponsors. I also want to thank all of my colleagues who have joined the bill. It is solidly bipartisan with Senators Booker, Graham, Kennedy, Hirono, Hawley, and of course the chairman, as well as Senators Lummis and Rubio. I want to thank my staff and all of the staff, Senator Blackburn's, and all of you who have participated, and it has been a very, very collaborative process. We may have some amendments this morning, but I really believe that this process has reached a manager's amendment that takes account of the concerns about security, cyber, privacy that you have raised. At its core, this Open App Markets Act recognizes that our antitrust laws are consumer protection laws. There's been a groundswell of support and enthusiasm for this bill because the American public recognizes that the mobile market is broken. This measure sets clear, enforceable rules to stop the mobile and desktop market from misusing and abusing their dominance as gatekeepers, as they have done for years. If you're a consumer, what this measure means to you is cheaper prices, more innovation, better products, and more consumer safeguards by opening the walled garden so that new entrants are willing and able to compete on values like privacy and children's safety. Today, the simple, stark fact is that Google and Apple own the rails. They own the rails of the app economy, much as the railroad companies did at the start of the last century. It's a market that is worth approximately $100 billion per year. And the gatekeepers' dominance allows them to dictate the terms of the market. They do it because they can. They have the power, a monopolistic power that enables Google and Apple, notoriously, to impose up to a 30% fee right off the top from app purchases, subscriptions, and in-app purchases. This fee raises prices for consumers. If you are watching, you pay more because of the monopolist rent, the fee that is charged to you as a result of their monopolistic power. You know, we have a number of prosecutors in this room. I was a federal prosecutor, the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, and then State Attorney General. We did organized crime cases involving gambling and extortion, and I did the Microsoft antitrust case. I remember in the 1990s, the Wall Street Journal quoted a Microsoft executive saying that the company wanted to use its dominance over personal computing to collect a VIG for every transaction on the internet that uses Microsoft's technology. As you know, VIG is a slang term that means the cut that bookies take when they bring bettors together. Microsoft was never successful in collecting a VIG, at least in part because of the antitrust enforcement that we brought against the company. And our entire experience of the internet has changed as a result. But after decades of lax enforcement under both Republican and Democratic administration, Apple and Google now have managed to do what Microsoft couldn't at the peak of its monopoly power. They collect a VIG on nearly every transaction in our app economy. The House Judiciary Committee's bipartisan investigation and assessments assess that Apple alone makes more than $15 billion in profits per year from its app store, and it estimates that Apple's costs are less than $100 million to maintain it. Break it down. You can do the math. Apple makes 150 times in profit of what it takes to run the App Store. That is what we call monopolist rent. And consumers pay it. Competitors can't compete because they are denied access fairly. Billions are taken from consumers because the gatekeepers can get away with it, and the Open App Markets Act will put an end to this tax on consumers. We've listened to those companies. We've listened to the app developers and countless businesses, consumer advocates, and technical experts. We've heard from members of this committee in putting together the manager's amendment. Again, I want to thank my partner in this effort, Senator Blackburn, for working with me on this measure, and I hope that we will be able to finish by the 11 o'clock hour, Mr. Chairman, and urge my colleagues to work with us. If you have amendments and you can work with us rather than offering them this morning, we will continue to work with you as we go to the floor. Thanks.
The Senator's correct. There's an 11 o'clock security briefing, which I'm sure most of us would like to attend, but we want to make sure we do our work here. Anyone else seeking recognition? Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank Senator Blumenthal and his staff for the way they have worked with us on this, and Senator Klobuchar also. And I appreciate how different members have chosen to engage on this, some earlier in the process than others, and as Senator Blumenthal said, we'll continue to work with them because this is the way we can address what I see as a market failure. And of course, it has been met with resistance from dominant players in this space because they don't want additional competition. I do think it's important that we also acknowledge the human element as a part of this. Senator Blumenthal mentioned some of the support across the spectrum that we have received on this. I also want to point out that while Apple does a great job of making secure devices for consumers in the Western world, they go out of their way to make vulnerable groups less secure in other parts of the world. We've received an outpouring of support from dozens of human rights activists and groups who are very supportive of this legislation and see it as needed for the marketplace. An example, in China, individuals have a real and immediate need for protection from authoritarian regimes and are seeking to extinguish ethnic minorities in China. And Apple seems to go out of their way to strip these individuals of their privacy, which they desperately need. And I appreciate, as Senator Blumenthal has said, this is a complex task. And we have spent a great deal of time working on this. When I was in the House, we worked on this issue. We would get frustrated that the Senate would not take up issues dealing with security in the communications supply chain. So we need to continue to push the boundaries on this issue so that we can maintain our global competitiveness in the virtual space. I do think we have to note that big tech has proven time and again that they are unable and unwilling, one or the other, to come to Congress and to work with us. Their arrogance, the arrogance of some of the executives in the Silicon Valley who believe that they don't need to work with with those of us here in Congress is something that has not been lost on me. We have seen this, whether it was last Congress in the tech task force we had here at Judiciary Committee, or what we have confronted this year in our hearings at the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection. And I do believe it is our responsibility to the American people to provide robust accountability and oversight of these industries that are so prevalent in our daily lives. I don't want to say or have people think that I'm saying that big tech is bad, because big is not bad, but it is clear that guardrails are now needed. We have to put them in place as companies use more of our data and as they continue to grow. We want to make certain this is a secure marketplace. And it is important that our agenda adapt with the times and the technology and realize that it has outpaced legislation to such a grave extent that more burdensome measures are now necessary to rein in big tech and get those guardrails in place. This bill is not about breaking up companies, but I think it does send a message, as do other pieces of legislation we're working on, that companies are not going to be able to come lobby their way out of this, that they do need to be accountable to the consumer marketplace, and that it is going to be us working with the FTC, working with the state's attorneys general, that will make certain that we have solutions that are enforceable. So the manager's amendment does reflect a tremendous amount of bipartisan work, and I do thank everyone for engaging and those who will continue to engage on this. We've worked to address many of the concerns that both members and industry have raised, and we're looking forward to continuing that work as we move it to the floor for a vote. And I thank my colleagues for their good work on the effort and urge a yes vote.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. The two principal sponsors have spoken. There are others who have asked to speak. All I would caution them as we anticipate the possibility of some amendments, and we need some time to consider them. So if they'll keep their remarks condensed and concise, we start with the senator from California, Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to briefly share some concerns about this bill the committee is considering. I want to thank Senator Blumenthal for working with me to address certain issues relating to cybersecurity. I think it's very important that the bill provides sufficient protections for cybersecurity and user privacy. The manager's amendment that makes technical changes, I believe, improves the privacy and security issue, and it makes major improvements. However, I'm still concerned with the current scope of the bill and the fact that it targets 3 companies, Apple, Google, and Microsoft, 3 California companies. For a company to be covered by the bill, the company must have 50 million users in the United States. I'm concerned that this number was selected as a way to single out particular companies, rather than because of the policy goals. If we're concerned here with the use of apps and how they're downloaded and paid for, it would seem to make sense to have the policy affect all companies that manage app stores of any reasonable size. This bill does not do that. If a company has a dominant position within its own market, but the overall size of the market is smaller, the company's practices may still cause harm to consumers. If the bill is really to protect consumers and spark competition, I believe these companies should also be included within the scope of the bill. I just want to thank Senator Blumenthal for working with us, and I hope we can continue to have discussions as the bill moves forward. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I believe next seeking recognition, Senator Padilla, then Tillis and Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to begin also by thanking Senator Blumenthal and his staff for their genuine, thoughtful, and robust engagement with me and my staff leading up to this markup. As we've all recognized, these are complex issues that affect nearly every American, and I can't stress enough how important it is that we take the time to get it right. Now, as I said, colleagues, at the last markup, my biggest consideration on antitrust and competition bills is their impact on consumers. And so I'm encouraged by these bipartisan efforts to rein in monopolistic practices and anti-competitive behavior. As we address these concerns, we need to be careful not to create or exacerbate other problems for consumers on issues like privacy, cybersecurity, and potential hate speech. Now, with respect to this bill, I agree with the sponsors that consumers do suffer from lack of competitive pressures on App Store operators. This allows some App Store operators to extract unreasonable fees and monopolistic fees from app developers, for example, which in turn get passed on to consumers, or it can even preclude app developers from offering consumers a particular product. I strongly support the goal of the bill to empower consumers with greater choice. And I appreciate the appeal of this bill in mandating that companies allow consumers to download app stores as well as third-party apps directly from a browser onto their devices. Now, when a product is as expensive as a popular game console or an iPhone, and your digital life is so intertwined with the company's suite of products, the lock-in effect is very real. Now, if your favorite app or your child's favorite app were to be kicked off the App Store, your enjoyment or your child's enjoyment of the device diminishes. That, too, is very real. Now, that said, I think it's also important to recognize that in seeking to empower consumers with greater choice, if we aren't careful, we might be taking away a choice from the marketplace that many consumers want when they used a closed device. Look, it's not hard to imagine that some consumers might prefer a closed device that provides a layer of security and helps them prevent from inadvertently downloading malware or spam. The manager's amendment attempts to address this concern by creating an opt-in model for side-loading third-party apps and using alternative app stores, and allows for the creation of warnings. Like, I think we all know someone who mindlessly ignores warnings related to cookies or terms of service. We should empower consumers with the ability to go beyond just warnings and instead give them the option to choose, if that's their choice, choose a more closed ecosystem. If consumers want to sideload apps from a browser, they should be allowed to, but they should do so knowing what that means and with meaningful privacy and security standards in place. Now, colleagues, I filed 2 amendments to this effect that I will not be taking up today, but I do look forward to discussing further with the bill sponsors after this markup. I also believe that there are ways to regulate the large fees that Apple and Google charge app developers, as well as the other anti-consumer practices of the App Store, without forcing consumers to give up the privacy and cybersecurity protections that they value. And I'll offer just a quick example. If a goal of this bill is to prevent app stores from taking gross commissions or payments from in-app purchases, there may be a simpler way, and that would be to just cap fees, Mr. Chairman, like you did with interchange fees in 2010 as part of Dodd-Frank, rather than us getting into the mechanics of payment processors. A lot of consumers appreciate having centralized payment processing and billing so they can quickly and conveniently dispute charges, cancel subscriptions, and limit the number of entities that have access to their financial information. Again, it's about consumer choice. And finally, I want to flag a concern that in trying to address the ability of App Store operators to limit the discoverability of third-party apps in Section 3E of the bill on page 4, we may be unintentionally providing an avenue for propagators of hate speech to dispute their placement within app stores. Mr. Chair, I'd like to enter a letter into the record from numerous nonprofit organizations that speaks to this.
Without objection.
I hope the bill sponsors will work with me and these groups to address these important concerns. Just in closing, I can't reiterate enough how much I appreciate the hard work and genuine consultation with me and other members that has gone into this legislation. I think we share a common desire of ensuring that we have an open and competitive app ecosystem that benefits consumers without jeopardizing their privacy and security. I look forward to supporting this bill moving forward, and I look forward to working with the bill sponsors to make further changes that address the concerns I've raised today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Padilla. We have Senator Tillis, Klobuchar, and Cornyn. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another good news, bad news story. I have a 14-page opening statement, and I've filed 14 amendments. However, I'm going to submit the opening statement for the record with consent and just say that I have 3 amendments that I do intend to ask for a vote on. I will not be asking for a vote on the remaining 11. And I look forward to getting to the amendments.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I want to thank Senator Blumenthal, Senator Blackburn for their leadership on this bill. I just want to reiterate their thoughts that this is about restoring competition, reducing costs for consumers, Apple and Google basically operate twin monopolies in app distribution through their app stores. They're using their market power to charge up to a 30% tax on competing app developers. That's what's happening. And in a response to some of the issues raised by colleagues about privacy, and my colleagues did address these, but I did want to note that we have heard from many experts on this topic. Senator Lee and I had an excellent hearing that many of you participated in, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Consumer Reports, a security expert, and one expert noted that it's simply not true that this legislation puts user privacy and security at risk. The company's claims about risk to privacy and security are both false and disingenuous. We have let these largest app stores owned and run by digital giants act anti-competitively for far too long. Yes, we're proud of these companies. I have one of their phones. That's okay. You can still believe in the work they've done, the people they employ, the innovation, and believe that we still have to put some rules of the road in place to allow the next Apple and the next Google to bring our next round of innovations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'd encourage members now, if they have amendments, please prepare to offer them. Senator Cornyn is next.
Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment, and but first I just want to say, as others have said, how much I appreciate the work that's been done on this bill. We all agree that there are problems with big tech and its ecosystem, and how best to resolve them is a difficult and complicated question. I do want to share just a preliminary sort of philosophical concern. In our free enterprise system, people are given the opportunity to create something of value, and if they are successful in marketing it and people want it, consumers want it, if it meets a consumer need, then they can make money selling it on the open market. They can also, in the meantime, employ many Americans, perhaps small and large numbers of Americans, to work in that business. And I hope we're not, by focusing on these specific cases, suggesting that somehow there's something wrong with creating a new product that has value to consumers and making a profit and creating jobs. I think that is certainly a concern. And if for example, you're better than your competitor at doing it, and in the process charge a premium for your product that consumers are willing to pay, it strikes me as concerning that we say that, well, now you have to share not only your platform, whether it's a storefront or whether it's a digital platform, with competitors, and you have to share your proprietary information and intellectual property that you have developed in the course of your business. So that's a, shall I call it, a philosophical concern that I think is raised by this bill. Secondly, I just want to reiterate a process concern with this bill, as we did last week. As I mentioned, this is a complex topic, and certainly we want to avoid any unintended errors. And I think a full hearing before the Judiciary Committee would have been beneficial, just as I believe that last week when we marked up the antitrust bill, that a subcommittee hearing was really inadequate to provide a full airing of all of the various complexities and issues that legislation raised. I do believe that there's been a growing tendency in Congress to concentrate power in the leadership, whether it's at the committee level or at the leadership of the houses of Congress, to the detriment of the opportunity of individual members to be able to participate in the process. My friend Senator Blumenthal, whom I've worked with a number of times, has asked that we move this bill through, and he's promised in good faith to work with me on the floor. The problem with that is there is no right to get a vote on an amendment on the floor. We know that sometimes the leader will fill the tree and file for cloture, and there is no opportunity at all for a member to have any influence on the eventual outcome or final product on the floor. So that means that the only opportunity we have is in the committee, and as a member of the committee, to offer amendments as a matter of right. So I am very concerned, both with the tendency to concentrate power when it comes to the leadership here in Congress, both in the House and the Senate, to the detriment of rank and file members, and now in the course of the committee, not only to not have a full legislative hearing and an opportunity to air the issues, particularly in a complex area like this, but also a tendency, again, to truncate the process in a way that I think will detract from the quality of our work product. Now I want to turn specifically to the bill and my concerns about cybersecurity. We are facing a serious inflection point at the interaction of cybersecurity and national security. And I don't think we should understate the harm of foreign and bad faith domestic actors to try to gain access to Americans' phones and computers under the guise of open development. This is not a theoretical concern. I have in my hand an article dated February the 1st, 2022, from NPR. The headline reads, FBI advises athletes to leave their personal phones at home for the Beijing Olympics. And I'd ask unanimous consent that the article be made part of the record following my remarks. Thank you. If I can just read briefly, the FBI warns that an app that participants in the Olympics are required to download, called the Health Monitoring System. All athletes traveling to Beijing from outside the country are required to download and use the app's Health Monitoring System for 14 days prior to departure for China and during the duration of their stay. The FBI goes on to warn that the app could pose a potential security risk to attendees, as could other commonly used programs like digital wallets. Such apps could be used by attackers to steal personal information or install tracking tools, malicious code, or malware. So this, again, is not a theoretical concern. I believe that the United States generally provides a better cybersecurity environment than others on the international stage. And while I appreciate the efforts to provide national security exclusions in the bill, I think they're too limited and too specific for what the potential downsides are. I'm especially concerned about the requirements involved, such as the requirement that a national security risk be formally identified by the federal government before it can be, that exclusion would apply. I worry that this legislation, though intended to stop abuses, will lead to a situation where consumers are simply unable to protect their personal data or keep malware off of their devices. I want to get these questions answered, which is why I wish we had had an opportunity for a full committee hearing. Mr. Chairman, if appropriate, I'd be happy to offer an amendment that I've circulated, SIL 22277.
Senator, there are two other members on your side who've asked for recognition. We have limited amount of time.
I'm not trying to butt ahead of them.
I understand.
I'll be happy
I don't know
to
if
wait until you're ready.
I don't know if they're seeking to offer amendments or make speeches. It's entirely their decision. But if we are going to try to consider amendments, I think we ought to get into that soon. I do want to respond, though, because I've heard this repeatedly, and we did a little work on this question about the practice of this committee to hold full committee hearings on a bill before after it's been introduced. So we went back and took a look at the last two Congresses under Chairman Graham and Chairman Grassley. 49 bills marked up in committee during that period of time. By our count, six of the 49 had a full committee hearing. One had a subcommittee hearing in that Congress before they marked it up. We'll put a list of those bills in the record. Also, I hope it's clear, any member of this committee can attend and participate in any subcommittee hearing. Our subcommittees are holding excellent hearings, and I've encouraged the chairs and ranking members of those subcommittees to take the ball and run, and they've done an extraordinary job. Furthermore, my office routinely receives requests from offices of both sides of the aisles to discharge and hotline bills from the committee without either a hearing or a committee markup. This is common practice by chairs of both parties. So I'm all for hearings, but what I've tried to do is empower subcommittees to carry the ball. It all doesn't have to come back to the full committee, and my honor and glory to chair the hearing. I attended those meetings, and I hope others will as well. So, Senator Cornyn, please.
If I can briefly respond, Mr. Chairman, all bills are not alike. And there are a few bills that entail the complexity and the possibility or probability of unintended consequences more than a bill like this. As has been pointed out, this is a huge part of our economy, and the companies that are being targeted are significant employers of Americans. And I just think, most of us are generalists by nature. We're not necessarily experts. I know that varies from senator to senator, but there are questions that I think we need to ask of the experts that need to be fully aired. And yes, you're exactly right. Frequently, there are bills that get hotline and passed by unanimous consent that are not controversial. This is not one of those bills. And I would say that I don't believe a subcommittee hearing is a substitute for a full committee hearing. As you know, many of us are members of multiple committees and frequently have to entail conflicts where the committees that we actually sit on in full committees have simultaneous hearings or markups. And so to suggest that a subcommittee hearing is a substitute for a full committee hearing in a complex area like this, let's just say you and I disagree.
Senator Durbin, just one sentence, since I'm the chair of this subcommittee. Both Senator Durbin and Senator Grassley, who have incredibly busy schedules, have found the time to come to the subcommittee hearings because they know these bills are important over and over again. And I think that we have done an excellent job chairing these hearings. Several members, including yesterday, off committee, have come to the hearings. And again, I'm looking at some of your bills, Senator Cornyn, involving prescription drugs, a huge part of our economy, that have gone through without any hearing at all.
Well, I'm going to say something on this, Mr. Chairman.
I find this just another argument by the tech companies, another way to delay. They've delayed successfully for decades, which is why we haven't done anything. So suddenly we have come up with this made-up thing when, in fact, when the Republicans were in charge of the 115, the committee considered more than 40 bills without first holding a hearing in the full committee or subcommittee. To the contrary, we've had this App Store hearing went on for nearly 3 hours. We've actually done our work, and I am proud of it.
Mr. Chairman, since my name was mentioned, if I can just respond briefly. The preeminent issue for our nation in terms of our economy and national security is the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China is a known serial stealer of our intellectual property. They also vacuum up all of the personal data that they can possibly get through cyber attacks on the Office of Personnel Management and on our individual devices, and collect that data and then apply artificial intelligence, in some cases, to target their own people with surveillance and to engage in human rights abuses for ethnic groups like the Uyghurs. This is not a trivial issue. And if by requiring open access to the App Store of a company that does a better job than most of screening those apps for malware and possibility of intrusion by foreign countries in our devices in order to spy on us. That is not a trivial matter. And I'm not suggesting that Senator Klobuchar does anything other than an excellent job as chairman of the subcommittee, but her concerns are not necessarily my concerns, and the 29 million people I represent are not given an opportunity to participate through my participation in a full committee hearing.
So I'm not
And I don't have time to come to every subcommittee hearing on the 3 full committees that I sit on, and I think that's a red herring.
I don't want to interrupt this exchange. It's important that we speak at our piece at this moment. I do want to tell you that the security briefing that starts at 11 o'clock about the situation involving Russia and Ukraine is one that many of us are very intensely interested in. But we're not going to stop this hearing for it. We're going to keep going if we go till whatever. So I want to say I'm going to recognize members who asked for recognition, and if you have amendments, please offer them. Senator Kennedy and then Senator Lee.
Well, I want to respond to the exchange between my 2 good friends, Senator Cornyn and Senator Klobuchar. I think Senator Cornyn is right. I think it's obvious. All bills aren't different. I mean, all bills aren't the same, rather. Bills are different. Now, I support the committee efforts. I'm glad to see us moving on these issues. The bill last week, there'll probably be another one this week. But they're very complex. They involve a huge part of our economy. We need to get them right. I am growing tired of being told if I ask a question, I'm in the pocket of big tech. It gets old. It's disrespectful. Technically, you're right, Mr. Chairman. We have done it all different ways. But to repeat what Senator Cornyn said, bills are different. All bills are not alike. And I strongly believe if we want to pass this legislation on the floor of the Senate, we need to do 2 things. Number one, we need to make sure that everybody has input and has their say. And if somebody disagrees with their idea, the response is not, you're in the pocket of big tech. It could be a fair question. No, I wish I knew well, strike that. And I think the best way to accomplish that is a full hearing. I do. Number 2, the worry that many of my colleagues have on both sides of the aisle is that this bill is going to get rammed down our throats on the floor of the Senate, and that we're not going to be able to offer amendments. And I've read the amendments that are proposed today. Some of them I'm going to vote against. Some I'm going to vote for because I think they strengthen the bill. So I just wanted to go of record on that, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, it's been my experience in the Senate that all bills are not alike, and mine are particularly good.
I noticed that,
Thank you
Senator.
very
I
much.
agree with you.
Senator Lee, and then I'd like to open it to the amendment process. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Tillis, Senator Lee.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank Senator Blackburn and Senator Blumenthal for their work on this issue and for their willingness and that of their staffs to be open and consider revisions to the bill. I've really appreciated the bipartisan engagement on this issue. It's an issue that's important to me. It's one in which I've personally and deeply engaged on for well over a year now, and Senator Klobuchar and I had a hearing on some related topics last year. It was illuminating, bringing to light a number of problems in the area. And it's one of the reasons why I've for some time now been raising issues with the anti-competitive conduct of the big tech companies. Anti-competitive conduct that manifests itself to a fairly pronounced degree in this particular industry, where we've got a couple of companies that are really wielding undue market power. They're wielding an extraordinarily large amount of market power that in some cases goes almost unrivaled. This shows up in various forms. Sometimes it shows up in the form of forcing app developers to use only their payment systems. Sometimes it shows up in the form of concerning allegations involving retaliatory conduct from app developers like Tile and Match, which is one of the things that came up at our antitrust subcommittee hearings last week. And then you've got things like the apparently immaculately coordinated takedown of Parler by both app stores within just a few hours of each other. Because I find things like these so concerning, and because we tend to have these two siloed monopolies operating with the insulation of high switching costs from one mobile device to another, I support the goals of the legislation. I did have concerns with the original bill. The manager's amendment has resolved a number of my concerns. I would like to continue working with the bill sponsors on a few outstanding issues. And it's my understanding that they've committed to continuing to work with me in good faith as we proceed to the floor, and I'm grateful for that. And that's why I'd like to speak about one of my amendments, but I will not offer it at this point. My amendment would refine the affirmative defense section so that defendants are not put in a position of having to prove a negative by establishing that the claimed defense was quote-unquote non-protectual. But however, I do think it's important to not let defendants off with pretextual excuses. So I would allow the plaintiff to rebut any affirmative defense by proving in the affirmative that it was pretextual. That is more consistent with how affirmative defenses work and ought to work. In any event, I understand that Senators Blumenthal and Blackburn are willing to commit to working with me on this to address this and other issues as we move forward with it. And so with that commitment, I'm going to support the legislation, support reporting the legislation out of committee today. Thank you.
The bill is open to amendment. Does anyone offer an amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you. I've got three amendments. I'm going to go in quick order. The first one is 22260. The amendment changes the definition of covered companies. The bill currently applies to 50 million users or greater. What we're trying to do here is target conduct for, jointly for those businesses who jointly control an online software store and either an operating system or an in-app payment system to better target anti-competitive behavior. It also changes the threshold from 50 million to 1 million users. I think if we're trying to identify future Googles, remember Google didn't exist 21 years ago, or roughly 21 years ago, that we should look a little bit more beyond the handful of companies that would be covered by the bill. I also just want to thank Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn, who's been working on this issue for years. I'm going to support the manager's amendment, but I would also appreciate your support on this amendment.
Anyone speaking in reference to this amendment? Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm sympathetic to the goal of the amendment, which is to stop anti-competitive conduct, but unfortunately, this amendment really changes the definition of covered company by reducing the user threshold from 50 million to 1 million. That really upends the focus of the bill, which is on the monopolistic gatekeepers, which have more than 50 million users. I really fear it will dilute the standard, in fact, make it unclear. If Amazon or Facebook create a dominant app store that can undercut rivals and impose extractive fees on consumers, they should play by the rules. And I'd be happy to work with Senator Tillis on modifying the manager's amendment, hopefully the bill, as appropriate as we have done with Senator Lee and others on his concerns, but I urge my colleagues to defeat this amendment.
If no one else seeks recognition, the question is on the adoption of the amendment. Senator, do you wish a roll call?
Yes, please.
The clerk will call the roll on the amendment offered by Senator Tillis.
Mr. Leahy? No. Mrs. Feinstein? Mr. Whitehouse? No. Ms. Klobuchar? No. Mr. Coons? Mr. Blumenthal?
No.
Mr. Brownell? No. Mr. Booker? No. Mr. Padilla? No. Mr. Ossoff? No. Mr. Grassley? No. Mr. Graham? No. Mr. Cornish? Aye. Mr. Lee? No. Mr. Cruz? No. Mr. Sachs? Mr. Hawley? No. Mr. Cotton? Mr. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No.
Chair Durbin? Chair Durbin, the votes are 18 yeas. Four yeas, 18 nays.
Thank you very much. The Tillis Amendment 22-260 is not agreed to. Senator, do you have another amendment?
I do. 22266. This amendment just makes better changes to better target harm to competition and avoid arbitrary standards that lack a firm basis in existing law. I think the amendment will make the bill stronger because it provides a known standard of reasonableness to exclude hyper-competitive and pro-competitive conduct. I ask my colleagues to support the amendment.
Anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Senator Blumenthal.
Again, I'm sympathetic to the overall purpose of Senator Tillis' amendment, but it would make substantial changes that would render this bill much harder to enforce and provide loopholes to big tech. I'm particularly concerned with the broad prohibition against unreasonable conditions as distribution. I think that the changes would make the rules less clear. It would give big tech the opportunities to drag developers out in court for years, and we know that by the time those disputes are resolved, those startups and rivals probably will be long out of business, which essentially goes to Senator Cornyn's point, which I think is fundamental here. We're not talking about taking value away from anyone. We're talking about giving rivals and startups a fair chance to compete and to have the platform that is necessary to compete. And that purpose would be undermined by this amendment. I urge that it be defeated.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just very quickly, I just believe it creates clarity and reduces harm. I think the amendment will improve the bill because it eliminates arbitrary standards based on the concept of favorable versus reasonable. I would encourage adoption.
Senator seek a roll call on his amendment.
Yes.
Clerk will call the roll on Amendment 22266.
Mr. Leahy? No. Mrs. Feinstein? No. Mr. Whitehouse? No. Ms. Klobuchar? No. Mr. Coons?
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal?
No.
Mr. Brownell? Mr. Booker? No. Mr. Padilla? No. Mr. Ossoff? No. Mr. Grassley?
No.
Mr. Graham?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornish?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Cruz?
No.
Mr. Sachs?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No.
Chair Durbin?
No.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 4 yeas, 18 nays.
Amendment 22266 is not agreed to. Any further amendments?
Mr. Chair, just a quick one, 2259, and it relates to changing the definition of app store, which is an Apple trademark product, to online software store. I would encourage adoption.
Anyone speak to the amendment? Senator Blumenthal.
Mr. Chair, this amendment would essentially change the term App Store to online software store, as I read it, and I really worry that this change would have unintended coverage sweeping into this bill any company that sells packaged software products. App Store is a common term in statutory text, and I urge that this amendment be defeated.
Senator Kennedy.
May I ask Senator Tillis a question?
Yes, sir.
Explain to me again why you want to do this, Tom?
Well, you know, right now, Apple, I don't know if you know the history of the App Store, but Apple just dropped the LE and trademarked that. That's their online marketplace. This actually creates a broader definition that goes beyond that. It would cover like Samsung Galaxy Store, Google Store, and future online marketplaces, which almost certainly are going to occur. And app and the App Store is a trademark of Apple.
Thank you.
Senator Kennedy. Any further discussion? Senator Tillis, do you wish roll call?
Do a voice vote.
Okay. The question is on the adoption of the amendment SIL 22259. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Any further amendments to the bill? Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call up my amendment SIL 22277. This relates to the cybersecurity of the devices that this bill would apply to. Under the bill, on page 5, line 18, it would simply add this exclusion: if the access does not raise significant cybersecurity risks or otherwise harm users. Section F is the open app development. It's the activities or operating systems that are covered. I think it's important for us to affirmatively state that if providing that access would basically expose consumers to malware or other cyber attacks or theft of their personal information, that should not be allowed under this under the bill. And so I would ask colleagues to support the amendment.
Anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Senator Blackburn.
Chairman, could I just get a clear definition of what it does?
I would. Senator Feinstein is a distinguished member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and we have perhaps heard enough to curl our hair in terms of the cyber attacks from our major adversaries around the world. All this does is says that you're not required to open your product to competition by something that will actually unload malware onto your device.
Thank you.
Or otherwise harm consumers. So especially in light of the sort of activity that the FBI is now warning people about in terms of downloading an app for those attending the Winter Olympics in Beijing, it just strikes me that that's a protection that consumers deserve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Senator Blackburn, I believe you were recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just speaking specifically to Senator Cornyn's concerns, which I appreciate, about China and the Olympics and our athletes. And as many of you know, Senator Cotton and I have talked about this concern for months. But what Senator Cornyn may not know is the Apple App Store actually has in their App Store the app that he is concerned about. And as he was expressing these concerns, as I said in the opening statement, we have received support from human rights groups for this bill and for what we are seeking to achieve here. Now, his amendment, as he has constructed this amendment, would basically gut the bill, so I encourage our colleagues to vote no.
Senator Blumenthal.
Yeah, Senator Blackburn has really explained it well, and I just want to emphasize we're all concerned about cybersecurity. We're all concerned about harms to consumers. What this amendment would do is create an exemption that would swallow the rule. Anyone, whether it's Apple or Google, wanting to defeat a claim here would simply say, oh, cybersecurity risk, and there would be no real protection. So I urge my colleagues to defeat this amendment. I agree that we should continue to work on this issue. We've worked on it quite a bit already in the manager's amendment, as Senator Blackburn observes, and we will continue to do so.
Senator Padilla.
Just quickly, won't be voting for this amendment today, but I do believe Senator Cornyn's onto something here, so look forward to continuing the dialogue.
There's no further discussion on this
Mr.
amendment.
Chairman, I'd like to respond.
Sure.
I think the term is called side loading, where apps that are not vetted by, let's say in this case, Apple, could be could appear in their app store. The problem is that, according to the information I have, Android devices and those that don't go through the same vetting process that the App Store process goes through are 47 times more likely to contain malware, 47 more times likely to retain malware. And I don't know about what my friend Senator Blackburn from Tennessee said about this app being in Apple Store. I doubt after the FBI notice it's going to stay there long because of its vulnerability, as the FBI has pointed out, to cyber attacks and theft of personal information that such an app would provide.
If there's no further debate on this amendment, it is Amendment SIL 22277. Do you wish a roll call vote, Senator? Okay, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy. No. Mr. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. No. Ms. Klobuchar. No. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. No. Mr. Roundup. Mr. Booker. No. Mr. Padilla. No. Mr. Ossoff. No. Mr. Grassley. Aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Cornyn. Aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Sacks. Mr. Hawley. No. Mr. Cotton. No. Mr. Kennedy. Aye. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn.
No.
Chair Durbin. Chair Durbin, the votes are 7 yeas, 15 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments to the bill? Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to commend Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn for your hard work on this bill. I think this is a good bill. I think it is addressing a real problem. And I hope to be able to support the bill because I think it makes meaningful progress addressing an abuse of power of monopolists in the big tech world. I have several different amendments here that are all offered in the spirit of trying to improve the bill and trying to focus its efficacy where we have real bad conduct. I want to start by calling up my amendment SIL 22293. This is an amendment that focuses on the definitions in the bill. And I emphatically agree with the authors of this bill that when it comes to app stores, there are two massive monopolists, Apple and Google, that dominate the app space. They dominate the app space, and their practices, as the subcommittee hearing demonstrated, are abusive to small players. The philosophy I believe that we should take approaching the abuse of power by big tech is to focus on the giant monopolists and limit their power, but at the same time maintain a free and vibrant competitive environment for smaller players, for players, new entrants in the field, for people that are not the giant monopolists but are the David seeking to slay the Goliath. That if we want to see the best cure for abuse of power is competition. And so I have concerns the current bill is drafted, the definitions are too broad. So for example, as the definition is drafted about app and app stores, one company that could be swept into it right now is Mozilla. Mozilla owns the Firefox browser. That has about 3.6% of all browser market share. It's not a big player. We want an environment where there are small competitors that are challenging the major incumbents. Likewise, Brave. Brave is an emergency tech company that offers open source, privacy-focused web browsers. And Brave is popular because it's transparent, unlike Google. Brave also is another company that potentially could be pulled into this. A third company that we have heard from is we've heard from a company, Valve, which is a smaller video game developer that operates a distribution system for PC platforms. As the current definition is drafted, a browser whereby you could access a web page arguably is covered by this bill. I don't think that's the intent of the drafters. I don't think these are the companies that the drafters are trying to get to. And so what my amendment does is it narrows the field and it puts in, it actually follows the model of the bill this committee passed 2 weeks ago, where we focused on the big major players, and so it puts in a substantial market cap requirement and a substantial requirement in terms of individual and unique users so that we are going after the bad actors in the field and we're not stifling competition from potential new entrants. And I think by focusing on the monopolists today and also any subsequent monopolists tomorrow who might rise to that dominant position, I think that focuses this bill where we really see the conduct that needs to be addressed. And so I would urge adoption of this amendment.
Any discussion on the amendment offered by Senator Cruz? Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate Senator Cruz's thoughtfulness in the 4 amendments that he has brought forward to us to look at. And of course, as you look at the definitions system, definitions portion of this bill, I think it's important to note we have worked with these developers. We've worked with Valve. They had no problem with how the definitions are. We've worked with the Coalition of App Developers, the Coalition for App Fairness, and have made certain that what we were doing is something that would help to solve the problems in the marketplace. But I appreciate his recognition and posing the question of what if for different developers. I do commit to working as we move toward the Senate floor, and on the amendment today, I would urge a no vote.
Further discussion on the amendment? Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Chairman Durbin. I second my colleague, Senator Blackburn's remarks. I'm sympathetic to some of the goals here, and I would continue to work with you, Senator Cruz, with Valve and other companies. We've heard from them, and we want to respond to any legitimate criticisms and sharpen the definitions, as you've suggested, if necessary. And I would just urge a no vote on this amendment.
Can I ask a question of the bill sponsors? Is it your intention to focus this bill on the big major monopolists, or is it your intention to sweep in smaller players like a Mozilla, like a Brave, smaller players that are no stretch of the imagination monopolists? Because if it's the former, I'm enthusiastically on board. If it's the latter, I have very serious concerns.
In my view, the former.
Well, I will take the representations from the bill authors at face value, and I appreciate your willingness to work with me. And with that representation, I'll withdraw this amendment at this time and not call for a vote, but I look forward to working with your staff to ensure that we're targeting the big guys and not the small entrants, that it becomes, we want a scenario where the next innovator can topple the monopolist, and if we inadvertently put barriers to entry or make it harder for a new revenue model to topple whoever the existing monopolist is, that's going backwards. And so with that commitment to work together, I will withdraw this amendment from consideration at this time.
Amendment 22293 is withdrawn. Senator Kennedy?
I wanted to ask Senator Blumenthal, I appreciate your comments, but tell me specifically why you think Ted's definition is too narrow, or Senator Cruz's definition is too narrow?
If you look at the amendment, Senator Kennedy, it has a number of thresholds
Right,
for applying.
right.
I want to look at those thresholds more thoroughly and carefully to determine whether they serve the purpose that we share, which is to go after the gatekeepers. And for example, just speaking for myself, not for any other co-sponsors, I would be loath to include a company like Valve at its number of users in this legislation. But I want to work with Senator Blackburn to know her views and other co-sponsors before we make decisions about what the threshold numbers should be. But as I've said to Senator Cruz, our target here are the gatekeepers that are throttling innovation and preventing rivals and startups from coming to market, imposing a rent or fee, a VIG, as I've termed it, up to 30%, which increase costs to consumers. I think we share common goals here. Senator Cruz and his staff have been responsive to us, and I want to continue that work.
So you just need some time to talk it through?
Correct.
Okay. Would you include me in those discussions?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any further amendments to come, Senator Cruz?
Mr. Chairman, next I'd like to call up Amendment SIL 22251. And this addresses an issue that Senator Lee raised earlier in this hearing. One of the most disturbing trends we've seen in modern digital age is the throttling by giant tech companies of thoughts or opinions or beliefs that are not fashionable, that they don't agree with. Every American has a right to be heard. Every American has a right to live according to their faith, to make the case to their fellow citizens. You don't have to be persuaded, but we all have a right to argue for what we believe in, whether it is political views or whether it is our religious faith. None of these fundamental rights protected in the First Amendment should cost a person their ability to live and flourish in the modern digital age. This amendment would simply ensure that app stores that are monopolists would not be able to discriminate against apps based upon the political or religious viewpoints of the developer of the app or the app's users. It requires neutrality so that they are true public fora. And this is not a hypothetical. We've seen examples of some of the biggest app stores working together to take an app off their platform because they did not like the speech that was being said there. Specifically, Parler. Parler was created as an alternative to some of the big social media companies because people who were conservative, people who were libertarian were getting censored on the big social media sites, and they wanted another place to speak. And we saw in conduct that was brazenly anti-competitive, that was brazenly, I think, contrary to existing antitrust laws, Apple, Google, and Amazon all simultaneously took Parler off their platforms and said, you're not allowed to speak, your users are not allowed to speak because we don't like the content of what you're saying. It's since become clear that similar speech was happening at the time on Facebook, on Twitter, on Reddit, and yet they were not subject to that consequence. Parler was. What happened to Parler was wrong. What happened to its users were wrong. And I recognize on this committee, there are members of this committee whose political views differ. Multiple members of this committee used Parler, engaged in Parler as a tool to communicate with our constituents. Even if you disagree with the politics of a particular speaker, whether it is on Facebook, on Twitter, or Parler, or somewhere else, members of this committee ought to be committed to the principle of free speech, that our constituents have a right to speak and persuade each other, and that we should not be enabling modern-day oligarchs to discriminate against the free speech rights of Americans or to discriminate against religious faith. And so this amendment provides simply a neutral standard that you cannot discriminate against an app if you're a monopolist based on either political views or religious faith. And I would urge adoption of the amendment.
I might just comment. This is tricky territory, and we know it. I don't believe incitement to violence is protected political speech, nor do I believe anti-Semitic hate speech is protected political speech. That's my interpretation, and I think if we are opening those possibilities, we're in for a much different debate. Does anyone else seek recognition? Senator Blumenthal.
Since we're approaching the 11 o'clock hour, if we haven't passed it already, I will respond very briefly. This bill is not about political speech. It's not about discrimination. It's really about protecting consumers. I am concerned about the way this amendment is written, applying to non-discrimination against, quote, political or religious speech or viewpoints, which provides a vast, broad reason that the potential anti-competitive practice could be justified by Apple or Google tying up action in the courts for years and years. And so I'm going to urge defeat of this amendment.
Mr. Chairman, a quick clarification. Senator Blumenthal just suggested that this amendment would somehow provide a safe harbor for anti-competitive conduct. To the contrary, this amendment puts an additional restriction on the monopolist. So it's not a defense for the monopolists. It is an additional restriction that you cannot be discriminating against apps or users based on their political views or religious faith. So it is exactly the opposite of a safe harbor. It is an additional restriction.
Questions on the adoption of Amendment 22251. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy? No. Mrs. Feinstein? Mr. Whitehouse? No. Ms. Klobuchar? No. Mr. Coons?
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal?
No.
Mr. Rono? No. Mr. Booker? No. Mr. Padilla? No. Mr. Ossoff? No. Mr. Grassley?
Aye.
Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Corning?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Sass?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn? No. Mr. Chair Durbin?
No.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 10 yeas, 12 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, I call up Amendment SIL 22252. This is a amendment, again, that seeks to improve the bill by making clear that an app store can protect the ability of parental controls, the ability of parents to be able to control what their child is accessing. I think the principle of open access is a great principle when we're talking about adults. I also think most of us in this room are parents, and parents with young children. The ability to protect your child from all of the terrible things that are online is important, and so this amendment is designed to make clear that developers can provide apps to protect, help parents protect their kids, and I would urge adoption of the amendment.
Any discussion on this amendment? If not, Senator, want a roll call vote?
Please.
All right. On amendment number 22-252, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy? No. Mrs. Feinstein? No. Mr. Whitehouse? Ms. Klobuchar? Mr. Coons?
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal?
No.
Mr. Rono? Mr. Booker? No. Mr. Padilla? No. Mr. Ossoff? Aye. Mr. Grassley?
Aye.
Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Sacks?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn? Chair Durbin?
No.
Chair Durbin, this is a tied vote, 11 yeas, 11 nays.
The vote's tied on 22-252, and the amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cruz.
I call up Amendment SIL 22287. This is a very simple amendment. It simply requires that 3 years after enactment of this act, that the FTC, the GAO, and the Antitrust Division review, analyze, and assess the impact of the bill and prepare a report to Congress. And I think, based on my conversation with the bill sponsors, this amendment may be acceptable and possibly able to be adopted on a voice vote.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do encourage this. And to the two previous amendments that Senator Cruz has had, which are really good amendments, addressing concerns of free speech and addressing concerns of parents, these are things we want to continue to work on. As I said earlier, we appreciate the thoughtful nature that he came forward with the bill. I think also it's important to note that Senator Blumenthal and I are also working on online privacy, children's online privacy, and there are going to be opportunities to bring some of these issues forward. Issues, as I said earlier, that have languished for a decade, that have needed the Senate's attention. And I appreciate that the focus is now on it. But for 22287, I encourage a voice vote and adoption.
Any further discussion? If not, the question's on the adoption of Amendment S 22287. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Being the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment that I will not offer at this time, but I do want to express concern that the bill as written includes a private right of action. For people who are not conversant with the jargon, that means it's a payday for trial lawyers. And I think that's would have a huge disruptive effect on these companies that, notwithstanding the problems we're talking about here today, which I am concerned about, are a huge part of our economy. And if, in fact, they didn't exist here in the United States, they'd be reconstructed offshore beyond the reach of the United States court system. So I would just ask the sponsors of the bill to reconsider whether we want to include in this bill a payday for trial lawyers as part of the bill, or whether we'd be well advised to take that part out. So thank you very much.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just note for Senator Cornyn, yes, we generally agree on private right of action. One of the things that we did, and why you have this very narrow, very limited provision, is it is limited to these new start app developers, these small companies that are being swallowed up by big tech. And that is the reason that it is in there, but I'll be more than happy to work with you as we work to fine-tune this bill and get it ready. This entire process is about opening up and freeing up the app marketplace for innovators and for developers. You've got a lot of them in Austin. I've got a lot of them in Nashville. And they feel as if big tech is cutting off avenues of opportunity and restricting their ability. So because of that, what we are trying to do is make certain that innovation continues for decades to come, rather than seeing this monopolistic activity continue.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just briefly respond, I appreciate the goals that Senator Blackburn's articulated. I share those goals, but I've been spent most of my adult life in and around courtrooms, and as a recovering lawyer myself, what I'm concerned about is class action lawsuits, for example. Maybe that's one area that we could find some agreement on, that there would be no opportunity for class actions. That's ways to, of course, aggregate a lot of these smaller cases where the lawyers end up getting more than the parties to the lawsuit in settlement. So I'm happy to work with Senator Blackburn, Senator Blumenthal on that provision. Maybe there's some way we can address that.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. And
May I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
why, sure, Senator Kennedy.
Senator Blackburn, who else would have a cause of action other than a small discriminated against app developer?
What you will see is developers who have created an application.
Right.
And then, of course, you have someone that grabs that intellectual property. So it is specific to that developer. When they have tried to position this and then they've been blocked from positioning themselves in the marketplace. You have seen it many times, the issue of patent trolls. It is very, very similar in that regard.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. If there are no more amendments to this bill, we will vote on final passage. The clerk will call the roll on S 2710 as amended.
Mr. Leahy. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coon.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Serrano. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Graham.
Oh, aye by proxy, I'm sorry.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis.
I don't see a vote for Tillis. Oh, aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Aye.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin.